Hey everybody, it's Kelsey. This is Essentially Book. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel, and today is the best video of the year where I do my top 10 books of 2023. So these will be books that I read in 2023. They might be backlist, they might have been published this year, they might actually come out next year, but these are the books that I have not stopped thinking about since I've read them. I have 13 books to talk about. 3 will be honorable mentions, 10 will be my top 10. And guys, I am just so excited. I don't really feel like this was the best year for publishing, but my stack of books that I read are all pretty spectacular. We'll walk through. It's a nice mix of backlist and current, and there's even one book that publishes in February, and if you've been following me or watching my videos, you can probably guess what that video is. So let's get started. All right, honorable mention number 1 is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. I read this with a group of women from my church, and we kind of have like a deconstruction book club in a sense. Like, we have all come to our church from past church hurt, and this book is about how the evangelical movement has erased women from leadership and how that's actually not biblical, how the Bible actually does not purport a lot of the things that a lot of us who grew up in mainstream evangelicalism were taught. And Beth Allison Barr is a historian, which I really appreciate because I have a history degree, and she's also a Baptist, and Baptists believe in complementarianism, and so she really struggled with that, being a scholar of medieval history. And so this book is her looking at the Bible from both a historical lens and a Christian lens, and explaining that women actually do belong in church leadership, and the modern readings of the Bible that say that's not true are actually wrong. And it is just such a wonderful book. I love it so much. I've been recommending it a ton, and this is one of my honorable mentions for the year. My next honorable mention is Venko by Sherry D. Moline. This book is like a witchy retelling about a coven of witches that kind of have to travel across America. So it's got this like Americana vibe. Mavis, millennial Lucky St. James, is bored. She lives with her grandma in a tiny Toronto apartment and has been waiting for something to happen. She's been waiting for something to happen. She burrows into an old passageway and finds a tarnished silver spoon humming with otherworldly energy etched with a long-nosed witch and the word Salem. And meanwhile, there's this coven of witches who are trying to find Lucky because they need that spoon to complete their coven for magic to happen. All of this is happening while they are trying to run away from this super evil warlock. But this book has just great trans and queer representation. It's a power, like an ode to feminism, an ode to Americana. It's like a road trip story. This was just so much fun, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And then my final honorable mention is These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. This is an essay collection that she wrote during COVID. And if you have ever heard of Parnassus Bookstore in Nashville, that's one of my like bucket list bookstores to visit, but Ann Patchett owns that. She has bookstore dogs there. She also is friends with like Tom Hanks, because Tom Hanks' assistant Suki actually lived with Ann Patchett during the pandemic while she was going through cancer treatments. And so this book of essays is like, there's so many essays about Suki and her and Ann's friendship. There's Tom Hanks makes appearances. There's odes to dogs and like fathers, and just these essays are all so beautiful, and I love how Ann Patchett writes. I read this again for a church book club, not the one I just referenced, but for my in real life book club that I do with some women from my church, and it was so discussable. It just was like a hug in a book, and for it being a pandemic book, there was so much hope and lived experiences that we all resonate with, and I just really, really loved it. So that's These Precious Days by Ann Patchett, and that is my final honorable mention. All right, my top 10. So coming in at number 10, I read this book for about 4 months this year on audio and physically. It is A Promised Land by Barack Obama. He narrates this on audio. It is a huge book. It's like 19 hours on audio. If you're going to consume it, I highly recommend consuming it on audio because he does narrate it and you get to hear his amazing voice. I just really loved this. I am trying to read presidential biographies. That's not really like a reading goal necessarily, but it's just something I want to do more of. And he just has a really good sense of himself. So he's critical of how he handled some things, glowing about how he handles other things, but he just has this really great sense of like purpose and what it means to be an American. And I love this book so much. I actually found like the most fascinating part of the book for me was the financial crisis and collapse and how like the bank bailouts happened and how he became president in the middle of that and had to just like take off running. And the policy discussions in here were very like thorough. He is so wordy, but it's just a sense of appreciation for this man. Like, there's no secret, I voted for Barack Obama. I love him. Just his style of governing and his like views of America and the American people is so inspiring. And like his love for his family is just so precious. So I just like, I don't know, I love this. And I think there's gonna be 3 more because this only gets us through like Osama bin Laden being killed. So I think there's 3 more. Cannot wait. Big fan. And then number 9 is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually was not excited about this book in the slightest when it was announced that would be her next book. I loved Daisy Jones. Malibu Rising was okay. I loved Evelyn Hugo. But I was just like, a tennis novel. I don't really like tennis. I don't get tennis. No. This book is so much more than that. It's at its heart a story about a daughter and her father. And the audio narration of this book is fantastic. It is like told, there's multiple narrators, but there's also like little news snippets throughout. So as Carrie is making her tennis comeback, like in her 40s, I think, and retiring, and she decides she wants to go for one more title to like hold that record. So as she's going through this, you get like snippets from the BBC and like ESPN and all this stuff, and there's newscasters that are narrating, and it's just a really fun audiobook. So I definitely recommend that if you were not excited for it, like I was not excited for this one. It was just actually really wonderful. Coming in at number 8 is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I'm really mad that this took me this long to read, and I read it as part of a 5-star prediction video with Lindsay's Little Library and Sarah's Nightstand. And I really don't need to talk about this because most people have read it, but this is a hug in a book about found family, a book about coming into yourself and being proud of who you are. And it's set in this like cute little orphanage with all these precious little people, including the devil. I just really loved it. And there's going to be a sequel in 2024. I can't, you guys, this book was so perfect. And like I finished it and it just put me in the best mood. And it's one that like, if you're in a rough place, pick this up because it's just a delight. All right. And then number 7 is Migrations. Again, I read this for my book club with ladies from my church. And I think there's 3 books on here that I read with them. So that's really funny that we picked good books. This is about Franny Stone. And she is just this like free wandering soul. And she is chasing the migration of this bird, because these birds are the last of their kind. So they migrate to Antarctica, and she somehow manages to convince like one of the last fishing vessels in the world to take her. This book is set when climate change is very real and the oceans have been overfished. And so the world is constantly trying to take back fishermen, like not let them go out. And so this is set during like a very real climate change crisis. And they are traveling in the very dangerous Antarctic Sea to follow these birds. You also get her past story. This girl has just a world of trauma. There's a murder in this story. You're just trying to figure out how all these pieces come together, and the way the author like leaves breadcrumbs throughout, and then how she ties it all together, how the characters that come into Franny's life like impact her. This is just such a beautiful book. It's so lyrical. I think I cried like 4 times while reading this because the writing was so good, and just the description of like the human experience during trauma and grief was just so beautiful. So that's Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey, and that is number 7. Number 6 is The Frozen River by Ariel Lahan. I read that in December. It will be in my wrap up, but this follows Martha, who is a midwife. This book is set in like Puritan era United States in Maine, and she is called to testify in court whenever women have children out of wedlock. And she basically has to verify that like the father wasn't present, all this stuff. So she is known for keeping journals, like she's a real person in American history, so she kept journals. But she's also had like, I don't think she had a single maternal death in her midwife practice throughout her entire career. So this book is based on her, on a true story, and a woman is raped. So there is like content warnings, but she gets pulled into this trial where they're trying to hold these men accountable. There's a murder that happens, and somehow all these things are intertwined, and just how Ariel Lawhon takes you on this journey is so riveting and so good. I could not put this book down. I highly recommend it for historical fiction. It was just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. All right, top 5. So, number 5, The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I first want to caveat that I do know that this author has some problematic things with him. I acknowledge that. However, this book wrecked me in all the best ways. It's character driven. It's about an Irish man who is gay and was raised in like an extremely Catholic household, and just how he comes into himself. It's a coming of age story. The loves he's had. You go through like much of the 1900s. I started tabbing it and I didn't finish it, but Cecil Avery, he's adopted. So his like identity as an adoptee is brought up throughout this book. And I think that that was one of the reasons why I really liked it, is I love good adoptee portrayals. So you see him like with his birth family and then him reuniting with his birth mother. It's a really beautiful look at gay history in Ireland, but in the United States too, because he comes to the United States since it's a more welcoming environment. I don't even know how to like describe this book, but it's sweeping, it's epic, it's lovely. I just really love this book so much. And then number 4 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I'm a little embarrassed that this one I had never read, and this was kind of her first foray into adult romances. And while all of her other books I feel like have more of a rom-com component to it, this one is very much a serious book. And it's about August, or Gus, who's an acclaimed author of literary fiction, and January Andrews, who writes romance. And they're both having writer's block, and they know each other from like college and somehow end up in houses next to each other. And they decide to flip, and she's gonna write literary, he's gonna write romance, and they kind of just challenge each other in their writing. They fall in love. However, what's really lovely about this book is it's also a very intimate portrayal of grief, because the main character, January's father, has passed away, and she learns that he has like a whole other life. So she's actually staying in his house that he shared with his mistress, all while he maintained a life with January and her mom. And so she's coming to terms with like who her father actually was and the grief of losing her father, while falling in love with Gus, while like trying to write her books, all of this stuff. And one of the like themes that I noticed for myself this year was grief in books tends to really like increase my rating, or I just really enjoy books that have been talking about grief. I don't know what that says about me, but that has just really worked for me this year. And so Beach Read is by far like the best Emily Henry book in my opinion, but it also just really, really talked about grief in a beautiful way while being a romance book. So I just loved every minute of this book. Coming in at number 3 is Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. And I'm gonna have to use the jacket for this because I read this a long time ago and I don't remember all the names as much, but this is about 2 families who live next door to each other and how one traumatic event really shatters their relationship and their lives and how it changes things drastically. So the 2 dads in this family are Francis Gleason and then Brian Stanhope, and they were both cops that worked together in New York City. They end up buying houses in the suburbs, and Francis's wife Lena is like super lonely, while Brian's wife Anne has like clear mental illness. And at the time, it's just not something you really talk about. So one night there's a really horrific tragedy involving Anne, and like the entire families, they live next door, you know, they're really close. Anne does something that sets into motion like these 2 families being ostracized and just all these terrible things. Yet at the time, like the kids of these adults grew up together and they're friends, and like how do you cold turkey stop relationships when you've known these people your entire life? How do you move forward? And you just watch these 2 families cope with their reality and their friendships and now their lack of friendship as they grow up. It's set over like 40 years. It's just really lovely and sweeping, and I think that's something else that really worked for me this year, were books that were like set over time and you get to see these people evolve throughout the course of the book. I just really love this. I have her newest book, The Half Moon, which I'm reading for a book club later on in 2024, so I'm pretty excited about that. Coming in at number 2 is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Ann Patchett just really works for me. I think she's a new favorite author. All right, so coming in at number 2 is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, and this is a story about mothers and daughters during the pandemic. That's something that worked for me this year also, like books that were pandemic related. They are in Michigan, right off of Lake Michigan at a cherry farm, and they're there for the summer. Like it's the true beginning of the pandemic when we were all isolating and you were forced to go home or leave school. And so her daughters are all like college age and they're back at the farm picking cherries and they're just talking and like soaking up that precious time. The mom, Laura, she really views this time as a gift. It's time that she wouldn't have had with her daughters otherwise, which I thought was a really beautiful portrayal of a time when the world was really scary. Because that was kind of my experience too. It was this really sweet, precious time with my family. We adopted my son during June of 2020. But it was just this like precious time that we got that I think will forever change us all. She and her daughters are basically reminiscing about Laura's time at Tom Lake acting school or theater when she was in the play Our Town. And she stars in that play alongside a famous actor named Duke. And her daughters want to know about her time with this famous actor. And this is just a lovely story about like first love, coming of age, and also the relationship between mothers and daughters and how you portray your parents as like upstanding, but then as you get older, you realize your parents are humans too. So you see the daughters kind of reckoning with that. And it's just such a lovely book. Funny story, my mom asked me if I had this book and I was like, yes, you can't have it until next week. So I was not going to film this video today, but I did because my mom wants to read it and I needed it to feature for this video. So I just really liked it and it's a forever on my shelf book. The writing is just so beautiful. There was a line in here, I think I tabbed it. Anne Patchett is really, really good at like writing about the mundane parts of life, but kind of with humor, or like the things she says, it's like, oh, someone I know would actually say that. So this is the line that had me like rolling laughing. Wondrous God, I had the presence of mind to stick a chicken in the crock pot with some onions and carrots this morning, and the chicken in the kitchen garden needs only to be picked, rinsed, and reassembled in order to have a salad. How often are you like, oh, I didn't lay out dinner tonight, and so you're scrambling to figure out dinner? I don't know. It was just such like a mundane line, but so relatable. And I just remember I like laughed out loud. So that's number 2, Tom Lake. And then number 1 should come as no surprise to any of you, but it is The Woman by Kristen Hanna. I loved this book. It was the easiest 5-star read. I read it in a day. I could not put it down. It's about the Vietnam War. It is super heavy, super graphic, gory. Look at triggers before going into it, but Kristen Hanna is just so good at putting you in these really heavy stories. Like The Nightingale was heavy, The Great Alone was heavy, making you feel what the characters feel. And the main character in The Women, she decides to enlist and go to Vietnam because she's a nurse and her brother was over there. And so she becomes a nurse and like the conditions are horrific. It's a war that we shouldn't have been in, but at the time when she went over there, people still had this like majestic view of this war. But of course, as time progressed, the United States citizens' views on Vietnam and how we treated our soldiers were horrible. And so you literally watch her go from being like revered to ostracized. And it's also at a time when PTSD was not a thing. And so a whole bunch of Vietnam vets come back to the United States and they don't have any of the services that they need after this truly horrific experience. So you have all of that. On top of all of that, this main character, she falls in love with 2 different people and you just like feel for her because with war, nothing is certain. Just, you guys, everything about it, like, ugh. And then in true Kristen Hanna fashion, the ending is so good. And Lena just read The Great Alone and gave it 5 stars. And I really liked what she called out about Kristen Hanna, and that Kristen Hanna writes endings that are like bittersweet. Like they're not happy endings, but she just is so real in how she writes. And The Women is no exception. I loved this book and I will be buying a hard copy of it as soon as I can because it was just that good of a book I wanted on my forever shelf. Seriously, it comes out in February and I need you guys to read it. I want to talk with like everybody about it because it was so good. So that's my number 1 book of 2023. Those are my 10 books. And like I had a fantastic reading year and I read the most books I've ever read. I have some great books to add to my forever shelves as favorites. Like I am just very happy with the results of this year's reading. So I'm super excited to continue watching everybody else's top 10 books of the year. If you are not someone who makes content or is a creator, I would love to know what your favorite book of the year was. I know that's a really hard question. I put off filming this video for so long because I didn't want to go through my books and have to make that judgment call, but it was pretty easy to make the judgment call, honestly, once I got like through everything. All of these books were 5 stars except for one, which was Venko, but I think I'm going to move that up to 5 stars because of how much I've thought about it this year. Thank you so much for watching my videos, and I will see you in the next Vlogmas episode. Bye, everybody.